Good evening, everyone. Welcome to day 5 of our faculty development program. We have discussed about different research methodologies, design, and research tools in the light of AI. The very foundation of research is literature review. We start research by researching the available data. Today, we have with us Dr. Rekha Datta, who's going to explore the different aspects of systematic review of literature. Let us have a look at her profile.
Dr. Rekha Datta is an associate professor specializing in literary critical theories, translation studies, gender studies, folklore, and film studies. She has over 2 decades of teaching experience and is a dedicated educator and blogger at tailspindle.blogspot.com. Dr. Datta translated critical essays of Kuvempu to English and is the recipient of the Kuvempu Bhasha Bharati Pradhikara Senior Fellowship. She served as a master trainer for the Skill Development Program, collaborated with Macmillan Publications. She has presented research papers at national and international conferences, including chairing a session in Vienna organized by ICLA. Her critical film review, Once Upon a Time for Today's Audience, received the Certificate of Merit in the Chidananda Das Gupta Memorial Award 2021. Dr. Datta actively contributes to the research cells of Presidency University and Christ deemed to be University and was a member of the Bangalore University Textbook Committee from 2019 to 2021. Don Bosco College welcomes you.
Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'd like to share the screen now.
Sure, ma'am.
Okay. I'd, at the outset, thank you all for joining and giving me this wonderful platform to interact with, fellow researchers. That's a wonderful offer and a very pleasant experience in itself. Thank you all so much. But at the outset, I'd like to, kind of start with knowing questions, the answers to knowing questions. Why do we do research? And I'm sure, like most of us are already completed our research programs as such, and some of us are doing it. So why research? Why should we research? You can use the chat box. I am checking your chat box, so you could answer me through your chat box, or you can unmute and speak if that's possible. Why do we do research? What drives us to do research? I'm sure all of us, are continuing to be researchers. Okay, contribute to the society, to the existing knowledge. Okay, to find new things and verify old facts. Okay, to help us think critically. Fantastic. Healthcare, absolutely. That's most important for all of us today. To provide knowledge for some topic. Yeah, fantastic. Explore new possibilities, wonderful. So basically what we are looking at is a knowledge database, which is already there. And we are trying to solve a problem, like like you say, there is a problem which is bothering us or which is there in the society, and we would like to find a solution to that. So basically, research is trying to an endeavor to try to solve a problem. So how do we go about doing that? How do we try to solve the problem? Because it is not something we are doing, unlike, I would say, a research in medicine or, an engineering, which is basically they're trying to build something, like whether it is researching about medicine, or trying to come up with a new AI tool, or trying to find new ways of building buildings, more endurable and sustainable ones. So we are, unlike the professional researchers, professional studies researchers, we as social sciences, humanities, are trying to solve a problem, trying to find out a solution using the database that is already there. But does it not make our research so very limited? Is it not limiting? If we are going to look at research as something that is already there, and the knowledge bank is there, and you are trying to dig it out, which is, it is like retrieving the archived memory. So wouldn't it be a very limiting kind of an experience? Again, I would request you to use the chat box. I'm sorry if I'm making it a little tedious for you, but it's necessary for me to have this interaction so that, we can have a fruitful session. So does research in humanities is based on things which have already happened? I'm almost saying research in humanities is redundant. Do you agree? Okay. If it is just retrieving from the archives, it is limiting. Yeah, there are doubts. I agree. In fact, I've been thinking, pondering about why literature itself is so important. What makes literature people relevant today? If we are all the time constantly talking about what has happened, and and whatever we are going to talk about is not going to contribute to the future, how do we make literature relevant today? What literature we are doing, how do we make it relevant? Interestingly, what I find is, of all humanities, I would take this liberty, though of course it is questionable, but I would, as a passionate reader and a researcher, I definitely like to make this point that literature is one of the most futuristic disciplines, for the simple reason that literature um, is one entity that is capable of creating spatiality. It is not linear. If we are looking at past, present, and future, that's linear. But what literature does basically is it creates a spatiality wherein it can understand, the writer tries to present. I'm talking of the creative literary writing, where the writer presents a, beautiful kind of a scenario which is rooted in the present, looks at the past, and at the same time looks at the future. So there is a kind of a spatiality that is created, and it is almost predicting of the future. The reason I had to talk, bring this point highlight this point, emphasize this point, is also because when we are talking of literature review, especially in social sciences and humanities, it becomes very literature review becomes it becomes a very um, challenging task, because what do we choose? There seems to be a plethora of information there. So what is it that we do? So I think one solution is provided by systematic literature review. That is something that has created a kind of speciality on its own. So this is the path that we are going to take today. In this brief session that we have today, we are going to look at the definitions of literature review, aims, types, differences, and steps of systematic literature review, and limitations of systematic review. And I hope to wind up the session at least 10 minutes early, so that we can have a small question answer session for discussion. And you can request to the participants, if you feel you should stop me at some point of time, please feel free to do that, or we will have time for discussion at the end of this session. Yeah, so what basically is literature review? Before we come to what is literature review, I would like to highlight the fact that um, literature review is something that begins by the time we decide to take or be involved with research. This is something we constantly are doing, irrespective of whether you are registered for a formal course or not. This is something we do. I'm sure all of us are in the habit of reading newspapers, or watching television. We never watch one television or read one newspaper or one magazine. We will be watching two or three different channels, or watching two or three different OTTs, or we have access to multiple social media platforms. So that basically tells us that we are constantly gathering information, gathering knowledge across different medias and different platforms. So literature review is something of a similar endeavor, only in a much more refined and a much more scholarly space when it comes to literature review in a academic situation, like when you are registering for research. So literature review basically refers to that part of the thesis where there is extensive reference related to the research and theory in your field of study. So from here on, we are, let's start looking at literature in a more formal way, more structured way, uh, in the sense of when we start writing. I am not talking about the time when we are, doing research in terms of reading, collecting information. I have uh, tried to focus on the structure of the thesis, your dissertation, and which part of the dissertation does literature review come, because that, I think, for me, and as systematic literature review says, is one of the focal points. It One of the differences that I find between the traditional literature review and systematic literature review is that systematic literature review emphasizes literature review a lot more in many different ways than in a traditional research. So in a research dissertation, where does literature review come? If we follow the traditional conventional pattern of writing a thesis, we would say it is a part of, let us say, the first chapter, which is introduction. First you talk of the abstract, the research question, then you have the research hypotheses, the research methodology, and then you talk of research review. It becomes a part of the chapter. But systematic review uh, gives the space for having a defined chapter for literature review itself. And that shows the formulating force literature review plays in our thesis writing. Why does literature review play such an important role is one question that I would like to take up and engage with during this session. So, this is the connection. One answer to this question would be that literature review is one thing that makes the connection between your primary texts, your primary resources, and the theoretical framework that you have taken to engage yourself with uh, in relation to the primary text, and also your positioning of ideas with respect to the theoretical framework that you have chosen. So it's almost like a 3D perception that you have. You have the the research question, then you have the theoretical framework, and then you have your research concepts, etc. So what connects, the two of the three aspects of research is this literature review. So it is, in fact, your research review should be vast and wide so that it can support your research question. It supports your research, helps you in identifying the research gap, and helps you solve your research problem. This is why literature review is so often emphasized, and we find it tough to understand when we are going through the process. It becomes very challenging for us to understand why literature review is given so much of importance. Now, these are some of the scholarly definitions of what literature review is. Literature review should be succinct and give a picture of the state of knowledge and of major question in your topic area. Typically, a literature review forms an important chapter in the thesis where its purpose is to provide the background and justification of the research undertaken. The purpose of the purpose of literature review is to locate the research project, to form its content or background, to provide insight into the previous work. So, as evident from all the three definitions that I've chosen to highlight how literature is understood by scholars, I think three things become very, very clear. One is that it should be, it is a kind of a bridge which links the researcher, the resource together, and it also, it provides the purpose. It highlights the purpose of the research, and also it um, acts like a kind of a lens which is used to focus on the research problem and the insights that we are trying to share within our research. But again, like with any definition, these definitions also have certain roles to play, and there are certain limitations. And one of the major limitations that you will find in all the three definitions is that where it successfully highlights the centrality of literature review, it is also given a small space, unlike a systematic literature review, which highlights, emphasizes, gives it a separate space as such in the thesis itself. That shows the kind of importance systematic literature review does to the research itself. Now, coming to the aims of literature review, it's when I was preparing this slide, I was thinking, it's something so very ironical, because uh, the literature review itself is uh, done to get a clarification for your research hypothesis, research problem, and research aim also included. And suddenly here I'm thinking of what aim is literature review play. That was something, it is interesting to look at the aims of literature review. So one of the things that it does is clarifies understanding of the field. When we start our research, when we look back at our research journey, or even when we are writing, presenting scholarly papers, one thing definitely is certain is uh, that we are um, trying to seek a clarity to an idea. I'm not saying we haven't understood it, I'm not saying we don't know it, but there is definitely a lacuna in our understanding. There is definitely a gap in understanding. And the literature review that we do, irrespective of whether the literature that we are reading is from the past, or it's a contemporary, the most recent publication, it definitely clarifies our understanding of what the field demands. Because, like we all have agreed, research contributes to the knowledge of the society. And I'm not saying repetitive knowledge is not useful, but repetitive knowledge without insight is something that is questionable. So, what literature review does is clarifies our understanding of literature review and provides us a, in fact, shows a new way of trying to focus our attention on a new vision. And in its own way, by doing this, in its own way, it explains the rationale for your research. Now you start wondering, why am I doing this research? What is the purpose? Does this research have a practical purpose? Or does this research have or contribute to the intellectual uh, um, uh, repertoire of knowledge, of research? So, in what way is this going to contribute? Is something that you wonder. And what literature review does is it gives you that foothold which can tell you, okay, this is the purpose of your research, and this is where it is important. In simple words, it gives a direction to your thoughts, into your and in turn to the thoughts itself. And also, what the next step is that it places your research in broader context. I think this is very important for researchers, because most of the times we forget that there is a larger framework of research that is functioning, because we are so involved in the research that we are trying to do, whether reading about it, or practically doing a survey, conducting a interview, or doing many other things that are associated with literature. Most of the times we overlook the fact that there is a broader context. And what literature review does is, when you're reading literature, for the purpose of expanding your knowledge, getting more information from different resources, then you can understand where does your research matter, where does your research actually contribute to the source of knowledge. And so, in its own way, you're also evaluating the previous research. For example, you will be reading so many things um, about your field, about your respective research. So then, when it sort of bothers us when we suddenly find that, my God, there is so much of research already done. So in what way is my research valuable here? That's a question that constantly bothers us. So, to such questions which make us wonder, make us sit up, I think what literature review does is it tells us no, this is exactly where the gap is, and this is exactly where your research is a contribution. It actually plays a very, it's almost like a friend telling you, no, no, you're doing well, please continue to do your good work. And another aspect of a good research is defining key concepts and ideas. All our ideas will cease to be of practical value, of practical importance, if we do not define and identify what the idea is. That is why I think theoretical frameworks and conceptual frameworks play such an important role in formulating our thesis. Otherwise it becomes one abstract thinking. It doesn't seems to it doesn't seem to have a, a good practical side to it. So literature review helps in that, keep helps us keep our focus on research, doing our research, and making research worth it, making research contribute to a contribution to the resource, to the knowledge bank. And also it helps in identifying research in related areas that generalize and transfer to you or transferable to your topic. Today I see a lot of interdisciplinary or sometimes multidisciplinary research is taking place, and it's wonderful to see interaction between different disciplines and identifying that life is not uni, it is multi already in its own way. So when we are doing that interdisciplinary research or a multidisciplinary research, the challenge is so much more because one discipline could define a concept in a specific manner, and another discipline could define the same concept in a different manner. Say, for example, a concept like authorship. Now, how literature looks at and defines authorship is very different from the way film studies would look at authorship. So, when we are trying to study, when our research is interdisciplinary, one needs to identify the intersecting point of ideas and explore that possibility. And that is where I think literature review becomes very important. And at the same time, that's also one of the aims of literature review, in the sense it gives us a sense of direction. Then it identifies relevant methodological issues. I think that's one of the most important roles or aims of literature review, because there should be, to put it in common language, a method to madness. Research is such a vast area, and there is so much of knowledge that is being generated, and every knowledge seems exciting to us, excitingly new to us. And how do we choose? How do we stratify our knowledge, because stratification is important. So without stratification, then it becomes very tough for us to understand and tough for us to work with our own research. So these are some of the important things that a literature review does, and that's how literature review helps us in making our dissertation unique and an important resource of knowledge and a worthwhile contribution to society. And yeah, these are some of the things that we need to keep in mind when we are doing literature review. That the first and foremost important thing is literature review is an ongoing process. it is never complete. Like I remember when I was doing my research, um, it was almost the finishing stage, and I found a new book and I had to add it. So it became very important for me to do that, because that added to added a new dimension to the research that I was doing. So it's an ongoing process. You can never say, okay, I quit, no more of literature review now, only writing. I don't think a stage comes to that, that kind of a stage we ever reach as researchers is very doubtful to me. But at the same time, as a researcher who's in charge of your own research, one should also be able to say, yeah, this is where I think I should focus on what I need to contribute, because the knowledge resource that is available to us is almost infinite, I would say. And if we allow this infinity to attract us, then it becomes very difficult to come up with your own points. So there must come a time where we will say, yeah, so far and no further. So that is one aspect of literature that is exciting, and at the same time, uh, quite a fascinatingly dangerous side of literature review, I would say. But in the initial stages, it does help to formulate the research question, uh, because unless we understand what the research gap is, unless we understand in our own minds, to our own self, clarify what the research question is for which we are seeking an answer, the entire research is not going to get the vision or the clarity of our answer. So this is one of the things that literature review does, and of course help identify relevant theoretical and conceptual framework. And because now um, the higher educational institutions have introduced literature review at all levels, actually research at all levels, in almost defined, simply defined ways. We must also know how at each level what is to be expected of a learner at each level, at the UG level, at the PG level, and of course at the level of a PhD scholar. So in the initial stages, it is going to be a simple summary of the chosen literature, which has helped to understand the research problem or the research question. Uh, and perhaps at the postgraduate level, we can expect a little more intense kind of a literature review, where the student can be expected to identify and uh, explain why this literature is important and what is its contribution to the research that the student has taken up. But at the level of doctoral level, what is important is an analytical synthesis and covering all known resources available. All known resources available might be a little too daunting, given the fact that today we have AI and the internet with its almost inexhaustible kind of resource that it opens to us. But definitely an extensive study of the material uh, that is available to a researcher has to be undertaken. And at the same time, a researcher must have the discretion of identifying what is a relevant source and what is not a relevant source. That, of course, brings us to the question of how do we recognize or include a literature review, include resource for under literature review. Because if it does not accept my idea of the research, then is it to be included? Do I need to read it? Do I need to know something which does not agree with my research proposal? I would say yes. It is almost like, sitting on a, putting yourself in the hot seat, because if a dissertation is about uh, examining your research problem to the bitterest end, I think including reading uh, about a source which questions your idea, the validity of your question, or a similar, challenges, dismisses even sometimes, can be very interesting, because that is when you will start, re-looking at your own research question, refining it, re-evaluating it, and uh, I don't see why we should not include a resource which has made us understand, given us clarity about our own research so beautifully, should not be included under research review. And I think it is important to very articulately say why a resource which questions the current research has been included. I think that's very fair, and also I think that's an important method of literature review too. So, having talked about literature review in general, uh, I'd like to come to different types of literature review. I limit myself to a very simple kind of uh, types. I will not elaborate on different types. I would draw your attention to the traditional or narrative literature review, which means to say, you choose a book, you have read the resource, and you sum it up analytically and identify the concept or the theoretical framework to which it contributes to your research in a positive way. That would be the narrative literature review. And a standalone review, which could be like I said, a simple thing of summing it up and saying, okay, this is how this work, this resource has made me understand my idea better. It presents uh, my own ideas in a better, with a better clarity. That I think would be like a standalone review. But a systematic review is more rigorous, in which synthesis of findings from a sizable number of individual studies on a topic often with a view. So this is something, that is now um, being engaged with, in the sense of, as a research community, we are endorsing systematic review as important and as a sustainable method of studying, or being a part of research curriculum. Because without a systematic review, it becomes tough for us to uh, uh, understand and identify our important resources. But systematic literature review is not only about organizing our literature, the source of literature that we have read, but it is also about uh, taking up the literature review in a more systematic manner, which we will come to in the next few slides. So this is the difference between traditional literature review and systematic literature review, where traditional review works, chooses works that are related to the topic of interest. The aim of systematic literature review is to have explicit, rigorous, and accountable methods. It does not limit. If you look at the 2 points, you will find that the first is it's a kind of um, a very brief engagement with the with the knowledge bank of research. It says, okay, you choose what you want, and leave the rest, and you make the best of what best resources that you have chosen for yourself. Whereas systematic literature review, on the other hand, says no. If there are 10 books on the same topic, explore each of it if possible, and then identify what method have you chosen to identify these 10 books uh, about your own research, and then come up with identifying the most important work that that contributes to your research. Yeah, it does seem a little tedious, like I said, but I think it is right in being so rigorous, because at the end of this very rigorous systematic review, what we will find that is our thoughts are refined, our mind is open to lot more ideas, and we are able to put forth our ideas with clarity, aware of the different dimensions, different discussions that has taken place, with respect to a particular idea or a notion. And traditional literature review typically summarizes the available information, because uh, that's a limiting role of literature review. But whereas the systematic literature review will say, discuss the topic rather than answer the research question. You have identified a particular resource and which agrees with your ideation. And what you do in literature, in systematic literature review, is analyze and say this concept is explored in this manner intellectually, or ideologically, in this particular manner, and that is where this resource is most relevant to my research. I think when we do this, though it is taxing, it appears to be taxing and tough, at the end of uh, this kind of a rigorous training that we put our minds through, we will emerge only happier and more knowledgeable. That, I think, is the end of all research. And traditional literature review doesn't necessarily apply modern methods. I'm not saying traditional literature review does not allow for modern methods. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it doesn't necessitate a modern method. You could, use a modern method, but it is not necessary. It is, even if you don't, it is acceptable of certain exclusions, let me say. But whereas a systematic literature review as a method includes discussions with resource persons, experts in the discipline, rich in implicit knowledge. Like, say for example, I'm not talking here of whether or not um, traditional method allows for interview as a method. No, I'm not talking about that. What I'm trying to draw our attention to is how systematic literature review accepts interviews as a part of your literature review, not only as a method. It is um, a beautiful source of knowledge which you can use as uh, you know as a part of your literature, as a part of your resource, either as a secondary resource, or as a reference. That is something that's that feels very liberating. In fact, one of the papers that I presented, I used uh, it was a film studies paper, and I used reviews of the film by various reviewers as primary resources along with the text. because that helped me to go beyond the reviews and the film, which otherwise would have been very difficult because it would have been very limiting. Because I would have looked at reviews by film critics as a primary text, and then it would have been limiting for me. But because I included it as a primary resource, it helped me to move beyond that. And that way, systematic literature review is a very liberating kind of liberating method, I would say. Now, there are some steps that we need to follow in doing systematic literature review. The first one is, framing questions for a review. What kind of literature would we want to read? What kind of secondary resources do we adopt? Do we identify? Then within that list, you make a kind of list of the list, that a second list of uh, the relevant work, and then assessing the quality of studies, because that I think is very important. uh, because um, what you would want to use as a resource, a secondary resource, or a reference to your research to validate your idea, or validate your conceptual understanding. Excuse me. That the quality of the prime of your reference should be immaculate, and it should help you to move, take the understanding to the next level, not limit it. And another important thing of systematic literature review is that it allows you to summarize the evidence, not in terms of traditional literature review, where you would be summarizing a text, saying that this is the gist of the text and this is how it has contributed to my knowledge. Instead of that, what systematic literature review does is it allows the modern technology to come into play, and you can create a more transparent literature review, because plagiarism, if we all remember, is one of the most important things that bothers every researcher. Not that we would like to plagiarize, not that we are involved in plagiarism, but how do we make sure that everything is transparent, everything is quoted in my research thesis, so that it it doesn't come as plagiarized resource. That is, that bothers us, all of us, a lot. So one of the things that systematic review helps us to do is do these things, like, for example, a bibliometric test. For example, I come across a study where the researcher um, conducted an online survey, not as in asking people, but doing a search engine optimization. She counted statistically, she generated the statistical data of the number of uh, articles, books, and other forms of knowledge resources about about the topic of her research. And she generated a bibliometric graph, which she later used as the resource, as a literature review, to show that very little was done in this area of research, in her research area. Most of the times it bothers us when we don't find enough resources for our research. So instead of allowing this lack of resource to bog us down, it would be interesting to problematize the lack of resource and say, see, this is the lack of resource and this is what I'm trying to do. So, such steps are allowed by systematic literature review. It could be a bibliometric test, or it could be a visual representation through flow charts and Venn diagrams, etc. Because Venn diagram especially is interesting for me, because when your approach is either interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, you will have intersecting concepts. So it is good to have Venn diagrams highlighting where your interests are multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary, and then explain that graph would give a lot of clarity to yourself as well as to the reader. And of course, interpreting the findings and the risk of bias selection, it removes these. Systematic literature removes this prejudiced or biased kind of a selection that we tend to do, we would like to do. Like I said, we rarely would choose to include a work, a resource which will question our the validity of our research question. Most of the times it is almost like threat to us, where we end up saying, no, why do I mean, is my research not valid then? Is my thinking not correct then? Is it not going in the right direction? So what we do is we almost most of the times choose those texts which support us, not those texts which question us. And in making us question our own research topic, it has also taken us to explore and find validation for our research. And that risk is something, that freedom is something that systematic literature review provides us with. And there are some important methods of systematic literature review. Like I've already talked about interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approach, I will not be repeating it. And also, it allows the complexity of the research to emerge with clarity. That is something I find is very exciting about systematic literature review as a method, because you can, like I said, you can explore different ways of presenting your literature review. One of the ways is review of reviews. Like I said, you can your text, your resource can be varied. And map and synthesis of reviews, you can present, it's not only map and synthesis of reviews, not only in terms of visual representations, but also in terms of complex representations of your thoughts and ideas. And also another important thing is meta epidemiology, where the researcher can go beyond the immediate research problem. You can have reviews which are not just countering but moving beyond you. It also is possible to do that. So now, a simple thing of, after discussing the introducing systematic literature review in a brief manner, to repeat, to sum it up, these are the few things that systematic literature review helps us to do, which is it creates transparency by indicating the by referring to the vast knowledge resource that you have referred to, gives us a clarity. Not only as a researcher do you find clarity, as a reader too. As your reader, I get the clarity of what your aim and objective is, and how you're going to progress in your writing of the thesis. And it integrates different ideas, which is very interesting and exciting, instead of a monopoly of a single idea, which of course, in the words of Chimamanda Adichie, the danger of a single story, as she calls it, we avoid that. Instead, we have different ways of looking at the research problem, and at the same time, it helps to keep our focus. Just because we are complicating or intensifying our research, it doesn't mean to say that systematic literature review scatters you, or takes off takes the focus off your research. On the other hand, I would say it gives us a better clarity and a better focus and accessibility of ideas and methodology. What is it where traditional literature review keeps some things amorphous, their systematic literature review makes your thinking and your result conclusions that you arrive at more accessible. And so the chances of your research being identified for the kind of um, knowledge it has uh, kind of how do I say that, uh, introduced to the world of research and take it forward is, there are more chances of it being considered for worthy of taking it forward, rather than it being dismissed as, this is something we already know, but the theoretical framework is new. That's fine. That's it about it. Now, instead of making a research work redundant, the systematic literature review helps the researcher to take the idea forward and make it more accessible to more people. And coverage in terms of the ideation and also in terms of theoretical and conceptual framework. And finally, I come to the limitations of um, systematic literature review. Like with any emerging field of study, there is a lack of agreed terminology, which I think is very important. Um, for example, meta is something that we use it often, but that is something that within the systematic literature review, scholars are yet to agree what it does. So it is a field that is still developing, but because it is still developing, I don't see why we should not be able to access it. And capacity constraints for using reviews, we all have um, a limited um, time, limited limitations in terms of comprehension or vision. I'm not saying we are incapable of it, but research is, I always feel, a process. So in that it matters where you are in that time of process, what stage are you in, defines and decides to a large extent what your research is going to be, what direction your research is going to take. So there are capacity constraints, because literature review, systematic literature review opens up your mind to a vista of possibilities. And also, there is one misplaced criticism that I would like to take it up here. That is, it is only for empiricist research and not for social sciences. Empiricist research, because systematic literature review emerged from the field of medicine, and because of which, the popular or the most accepted notion is it is important for empiricist research and not for social sciences. And most of the times, I always feel social sciences, and especially humanities and in humanities literature people, always feel we don't have a methodology that suits us. We don't have a tool which can help us. I think systematic literature review, to a great extent, I would say, helps us keep with the changing times. Literature research has changed over a period of time. It has modernized. It is no longer limited to a study of a novel, or a study of a film. It is gone beyond that. There are studies which are done to help teachers with teaching aids, critical thinking, for example. Reading skills, for example, there are researches done on different types of reading skills. So to a large extent, systematic literature review does help us uh, keep up with the present times, when it says, you can do this and show this in this particular manner. Yeah, and with that, I end my session with this, and I thank you all for your patient listening, and any questions we are free to do. I see some question here. Okay, ma'am, I'll just take this question and get back to you.
Sure, ma'am.
One question that I've been asked here is how multidisciplinary research, one concept in a discipline is talked about differently in another discipline. Differently in the sense of not contradictorily. It is from a different direction. Say, for example, I think I gave this example of authorship. Okay, let's take literature, like a creative writer, and the folklore, the author, and the film text. If we are studying these three, a text from these three disciplines, um, the the moment you come to written literary text, immediately there's a question of copyright. There's an intellectual property right. You are not the owner. The author is the owner, right? The authorship. I am the writer, so the ideas emerge from me. Whereas when you look at folklore, the author is not a single person. It belongs to the community. So the notion of authorship has expanded. There is, of course, intellectual property right. I'm not saying folklore does not come with an intellectual property right. It belongs to the community. And so what happens is the notion of authorship also widens. The idea of authorship widens. And when it comes to, when you look at the concept of author from the point of view of a director, he or she also has to work with a team. A film is a team endeavor. The vision might be the vision of the director, but a team contributes to a successful representation of the idea, story, the narrative. If the team doesn't work, then the vision, the idea doesn't emerge with clarity. So when you are studying, this is what I meant when I say a concept can be understood differently from different disciplines. I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for giving a very clear example for that. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, we have one more question. What do you?
Shall I stop sharing?
Yes, ma'am.
Can I stop sharing?
Yes, ma'am. The other question we have is, are there any emerging or recent trends in systematic literature review, especially in light of the recent AI concept that is taking up everything? We had discussed about lit maps, but in those concepts, what do you think are the recent trends in systematic literature review?
Yeah, like I said, I find bibliometric representations very interesting because it really gives you a clarity and it makes everything transparent. That's one thing. And the use of flowcharts, that also gives a clarity to your own research methods. How have you visualized your research? So systematic literature review in that way allows visual representation of your own literature review of reviews sorts. So that is interesting. And like I said, Venn diagrams are also very useful and give you clarity to the literature review that you have done. See, the thing about literature review is it's a vast thing. Like, it's a process. It's not one small piece of cake. It's in fact, I would say, multi-layered, huge, a whole cake that is there for you, and it is very difficult when it comes to reading literature review and understanding what a researcher is trying to um, do in the research. So what systematic literature review does is enable the researcher to identify distinct methods, creative methods of representing the literature review, so that the idea gets communicated with clarity. That I think is most important.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the
Yeah.
wonderful session. I would like to invite Professor Maria to deliver the vote of thanks.
Respected academicians and esteemed participants, as we conclude the insightful session on systematic analysis of literature review, it is my honor to extend a heartfelt vote of thanks to Dr. Rekha Datta for her insightful contribution to our faculty development program. Dr. Rekha, your expertise and methodological approach in guiding us through the nuances of conducting a systematic literature review has been invaluable. On behalf of Don Bosco College, I express our sincere gratitude for your enlightening presentation. Your dedication to fostering an academic rigor and your insights into effective literature analysis are deeply appreciated. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank
Additionally, I
you
thank
so much.
all the participants for their engaging presence and contributions for making this session a success. Wishing you all a wonderful day ahead and meet you all tomorrow for another impactful session. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you
Thank you,
so
ma'am.
much.
Thank you, ma'am.
1 second before we end, there's one more question. Can we use bibliometric tests in the field of English literature? Absolutely, yes. Because this is one thesis which I came across, which used bibliometric, graphs. You can take a shot of it and include it in your literature review as part of your thesis. That's possible, and that's valid.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, ma'am, and for all the
Thank you.
insights. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.